Right, it's 11 o'clock here on my clock, so let's go ahead and get the next session started. We have a double feature, so it's jam-packed, so we're going to try to keep track of time here. If you do have any questions, please enter that into the question and answer, and we can ask the presenters towards the end of their presentations. The first presentation we have is with Emily, and her presentation is called Hidden Lake Creatures. Go ahead, Emily.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Heald. I'm the Water Program Coordinator for the North Lakeland Discovery Center, and thank you for joining me for my favorite topic, my favorite discussion to lead, my favorite presentation to give to people, hidden lake creatures. Now, usually I start my presentation with an intro to the Discovery Center, a little bit of who we are, a little bit of what we do. Kind of short on time right now, so what I want you to know is that the Discovery Center is an awesome place. It's a nature center. We have a water program. I'm going to need you to go to this website right here, www.discoverycenter.net. It'll get you all of the information that you need. So this presentation is, when I do this in person, it's usually about 45 to 60 minutes, and I have parts 1 and 2 because I have a lot of really exciting critters to tell people about. So today, jamming everything into 25 minutes, I chose my personal favorites to tell you about. If you're interested in even more hidden lake creatures, then you can definitely send me an email. I'm going to list that again at the end of the presentation. But the plan for today is to tell you a little bit of information about a lot of different organisms here. So we're going to do 1 or 2 slides on each of these guys, and then we're just going to be moving straight along. So if you see something you like or you want to learn more about, make sure you jot it down because there's not going to be too much in depth about these guys. So when we all think about lakes and rivers and all of the different critters that live in the water and how they interact with each other, a lot of times you kind of picture something like this, more of this top part of the picture, right? We think of, or maybe a little bit of the bottom, we think of fish, where the big fish eat the little fish and the little fish eat the tiny fish. And sometimes we think about the birds eating the fish. Sometimes we think about the plants or a little snake, roaming around in the grass near the water. But very rarely, I would think, do most of you think of water and think about the bottom layer of this food chain, the plankton, the bacteria, all the really little stuff at the bottom of this food chain that it virtually supports everything else. Okay, so these are going to be the little guys that we're talking about today. And I'm going to start really, really small, right at the base of the food chain. So we're going to start with plankton. And, I think plankton became a really popular concept once this cartoon character was invented from SpongeBob SquarePants. His name is Plankton, and he's a villain. And I just really hope someday there's a cartoon where Plankton is the hero in the story, because plankton really are heroes. So the background on the word plankton, this word's derived from the Greek word planktos, and that means wandering or drifting. So that's because plankton are so small, they can control their movements a little bit, but ultimately, being so tiny, they're at the whim of the currents. They're going to go wherever the water takes them. And there are actually 2 major types of plankton that we're going to talk about. There's phytoplankton, with this part of the word phyto, meaning photosynthetic. So they convert energy from the sun into usable energy. And here's a little beautiful picture of what those guys can look like. And then there are also zooplankton. I know this looks like zoo, but it's pronounced zoo. That means animal, meaning these critters cannot make their own food from the sun. They have to eat other animals, usually phytoplankton. And there's that cutie right there. So starting first with phytoplankton, a lot of times people will just call these algae. So go ahead and use those terms interchangeably here for the purpose of this presentation. Algae are the very base of the food chain, and they are photosynthetic, which means they use energy from the sun to make their own food. Now, on Earth, all of the energy in our lives initially comes from the sun. So having these organisms that convert the sunlight into usable energy is vital to the existence of everything else. So, you and I, we cannot go outside, spread our arms open in the sun, and come inside feeling satiated, can we? No. So we need photosynthetic organisms, we need algae, we need plants to help us convert that light energy into usable energy. So that's the process, photosynthesis. So what happens here, we're using a plant for our demonstration here today, is that sunlight will hit the algae or the plant in this example, and then all these complex interactions happen inside the algae, inside the plants, and that will turn that solar energy into usable energy, which is sugar or carbohydrates. And another byproduct of this process is oxygen. So have you ever heard that like you should have plants in your house to keep up the oxygen levels? Trees are important for oxygen levels, la, la, la. Well, algae do that too. And actually, phytoplankton create about half of the oxygen that we have in the atmosphere. So what I want you all to do right now is take a deep breath in, let it out. And let's just all say, thank you, algae, okay? So in this way, algae, they are the backbone to everything that's happening in your lake, and they affect the earth as well, right? They're the glue that keeps everything together. They hold everything up. They're the powerhouse of the lake. They are the Arnold Schwarzeneggers of the lake. We love algae, love her work, okay? So where do algae live in the lake? Well, pretty much anywhere, okay? So we keep in mind that they need sunlight in order to survive. That's what's feeding them. They're basically eating the sun, right? So you're most likely going to see algae near the surface of the water or in shallow water because that's where it's brighter. That's where sunlight is reaching. They can be free floating amongst the water, or they can also grow on rocks or plants. So if you look into the water and you see something that you just automatically call the slimy yuck that's growing in your lake, well, that could actually be algae that is helping you to breathe. So again, where do algae live? It just depends on the type of algae, and there are thousands of species of algae, but you'll most often find them free floating within the lake or stuck on rocks. And again, you know, we imagine that slimy yuck on rocks and on plants when we think of algae, but if you look at algae under a microscope, oh my goodness, beautiful. Look at these guys. This is, I wish I could tell you a little bit about all of these, but just stare in amazement for a few seconds at how beautiful and diverse algae are, okay? So we're gonna move up the food chain here to another type of plankton. We're gonna move on to the zooplankton. Now, zooplankton, I know you've probably never heard of them before, but they are extremely important because I know a lot of you have heard of fish before. And zooplankton are important because at some point or another, most fish are going to rely on zooplankton for a source of food. Be that, you know, just when they're babies, when they're juvenile fish growing up, some fish rely on zooplankton for their entire lives, all right? So if you like fish, you like zooplankton. And they're the main link between algae and everything else. So they're that special link between these different food levels. And zooplankton are heterotrophic, just like you and I. And that means they cannot make their own food. They're not going under that process of photosynthesis. And that means they have to eat other organisms, just like you and I. So some are herbivorous, some are vegetarian, and they'll only eat algae. And then other zooplankton, like this guy right here, this is Leptadora. This one eats other zooplankton. And so you can already see, we're going to get over into this a little bit more, but zooplankton can be very, very diverse, and they're just so cute. Look at this one. So cute. If you're going to go out and look for zooplankton in your lake, you need a net that is a very fine mesh, but they pretty much live anywhere. They'll live deep in the lake. They'll live in the closer littoral regions near shore. It really just depends what they eat and what kind of habitat they prefer. And so you can imagine if a zooplankton eats algae, it'll be found in areas where it has access to algae, right? But zooplankton, they can withstand some pretty extreme conditions. So I put a picture of a bog lake here. Bogs lakes are usually really acidic. You can find zooplankton there. You can even find zooplankton in vernal pools sometimes. So if you have an area in the woods that is wet most of the time, but sometimes it dries up, you can find zooplankton there too. And again, an example of how beautiful zooplankton can be. Some of them form these little jelly balls around themselves. It looks like you're holding a handful of tapioca. All right, here's a really interesting creature. Everyone loves this. Tardigrades, that's their official scientific name. You can call them water bears, you can call them moss piglets, or you can call them the hardiest animals in existence. They really do look like little bears or little piglets, except that they have 8 legs, and they're just extremely interesting. You know, most people joke that if there's a nuclear war or if the world ends, that cockroaches are going to be what survives. But no, now you can bring this to your cocktail conversation. It's going to be the water bear. So there are about 900 species of water bear. They live in, they call it terrestrial aquatic environments. So kind of along the lake edges, moss that grows on trees, moss growing on your roof, you can find them there. And they can withstand temperatures down to negative 450 degrees. They can be boiled. They can be boiled in alcohol. They can survive 30 years frozen, which means 30 years without food. They've survived in outer space, which is a vacuum environment and has exposure to extreme radiation. They can withstand pressure 6 times the pressure of the deepest part of the ocean, which is twice as much pressure that bacteria can handle. I love to think about the people doing these experiments. They're like, what can we even think of that could possibly kill these things next? And they're doing it. I just saw this comic the other day and I had to add it of what it's like to be a tardigrade mom, where the little baby tardigrade says, oh, I fell and scratched my knee. And the mom's like, you'll be fine. I fell in a burning volcano. You'll survive. And then the little baby's like, I forgot to eat for 30 years and I walked to the South Pole and I got blasted by radiation, but I guess I'm okay. And the mom's so proud of it. Okay. All right. Next up, I know we're moving quickly. I just have a lot of fun things to tell you. Hydra are up next. And Hydra are named after a mythical creature you may have heard of called Hydra. And this is that dragon-like dinosaur where it has all these heads. And if you cut off one head, it grows into more. And I'm going to tell you about how Hydra actually behaves like that. I always think of these things, they're really small, but now I'm going to make you think of this. When you drive past car dealerships or whatever places having a big sale and they have these big blow up things that are flipping around, that looks like Hydra. I always think of them. So Hydra's cell structure is super simple. They don't have organs or tissues like you and I do. They just have layers of cells, okay? They're specialized. Some are for capturing prey. Some help with digestion. They're related to corals and jellyfish. So they're relatives of these guys. And again, here's what they actually look like in your lake. Only, less than a half an inch large. They are carnivorous, so they're going to eat their prey in a very interesting way. So we anchor ourselves to a plant or a log or a rock, and they don't move, but they stretch these tentacles out very far around to feel for food, okay? So they're basically waiting for something to come to them because they don't move. And then once they feel a prey hit these little tentacles, they have these specialized cells called nematocysts, and those fire a toxin into their prey, which basically stuns and immobilizes the prey. And then they grab the prey and they use their tentacles to shove that prey down into their body cavity. Here's a diagram here. It's like a cross section. They shove her on in there. Here's what it really looks like. And then they have enzymes that they secrete to dissolve that prey and absorb the nutrients. And then anything that they don't want to eat, any hard tissue or anything like that, they spit it back out through the same hole. And they eat, living things, small food particles floating around. So I kind of think of them as like a vacuum of lakes. They're just cleaning stuff up. Okay, moving on. The next creature I want to tell you about, they're called amoebas. So you may have heard these in the news recently because there may or may not be a species of amoeba called the brain-eating amoeba. It's deadly. It's this whole big thing, but don't worry, it's extremely rare. It's only mostly in southern states. So, like 99.99% of amoebas are great. They're awesome. They're unicellular, so they're only one cell. So this is just one cell here. And they eat bacteria, dead organic materials. They're basically a recycler in your lake. Okay, so they're eating dead stuff and then they're eating themselves. So they're recycling. They're a great food source for plankton and super small fish. And when we start talking about amoebas, they have some really fun terminology that goes with them. The first one is Pseudopodia. So that first part, that's Greek for false or pretend. Podia means foot, so we're talking false feet here. And that's referring to how amoeba move. So they actually just stretch out their little fingery areas, and then they basically just flow into themselves. And I have a video of that, so I'm going to show you. So they're not moving fast, and they don't have feet, but they move like they do. And then the other fun word that goes with amoebas is phagocytosis. The breakdown of what that word means isn't very interesting, but it's basically where amoeba will surround their prey with their body to engulf them, and then they digest them. So I have a video of that for you. This video is significantly sped up. Amoebas do tend to be much slower than this. Oh no, I hope my video works. I don't think it's going to load. But basically, what the video shows is it shows these moving around and slowly engulfing these two other little organisms. And then you can see that those little false feet get tighter and tighter and tighter until those two little organisms can't move around anymore. And then the amoeba dissolves it and absorbs its nutrients. YouTube, amoebas eating. You'll love it. Okay, all these creatures are my favorite, but this one is my top favorite. So did you know that there are sponges in a lot of lakes and rivers around here? Sponges, just like you'd see in the ocean, sort of, okay? Same type of animal, but they look a little bit different from the ocean. So sponges are filter feeders. There's a diagram of that below here. Don't worry about all this scientific junk over here, but think of them like a pool filter, okay? They're constantly drawing water in through the sides, and they're filtering particles out that they want to eat, okay? That's what this diagram is ultimately showing here. So they filter stuff, and then these cells inside the sponge will grab and digest the food particles that they want, and anything they don't want, they just pump it right back out. And now, because sponges are filter feeders, their existence in water is a really good indicator of good water quality. So they're absorbing everything in the water, so they're going to be more sensitive to pollutants. So here's some examples of freshwater sponges. Interestingly, not a lot is known about freshwater sponges, except for SpongeBob SquarePants, right? So you can see, even if you look these up online, you'll have a hard time finding too much about them. I took all these pictures. You can see they can be kind of mossy, kind of loby, kind of branchy, all sorts of awesome things going on with our sponges here. Okay, so wait till you see this, guys. I bet some of you have seen these before. Usually at least once every summer, someone emails me thinking that like a brain has washed up in their lake or like aliens have landed, okay? These are Bryozoans. Sometimes people call them moss animals, and Bryozoans are a very, very old animal. They've been in the fossil record for over 4 million years. So check out these fossil Bryozoans. There's about 5,000 species of Bryozoans. Most of them live in oceans, but we do have about 20 species here in North America. They're invertebrates. That means they don't have a backbone, and they're what we call colonial. So there are within this blob here, there are many, many individuals, and they all have different jobs like feeding, hatcheries for reproduction, defense, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I always like to think of these things as big blobby brain towns, okay? So what's going on here with the Bryozoans is that, again, there are many individual animals as we just went over. So each individual looks kind of like this, and they secrete that mucus around themselves, like in the past slide that we showed, and that's mostly for protection. So it looks like, I don't know why my videos aren't working here today, but again, YouTube Bryozoans, you can see them feeding. Basically what happens is these little guys will come out of that mucus coat that they have. They wave these tentacles around, and those are feeling for food, just like we talked about with the Hydra, right? When they feel that a food particle has come by, they grab that and they bring that back inside to digest. Okay. Here's some pictures. These are more like marine bryozoans, but you can see in this one, you can really get that visualization of how they can come out of that. This would be the mucus coat here. And then they have these really feathery tentacles that they stick out that capture their food items. This is, I took this through the water, but this is a bryozoan that I found last year. This looks like a zebra mussel, which is kind of funny. Okay, so with the interest of staying on time and respecting the time slots we have here, this is all I have for you today. And I'm not super concerned that you know, think back about Hydra and you're like, Hydra, they use their tentacles, which have nematocysts on them to stun and capture their prey and then shove it into their body cavity and they expel everything they're eating through the same hole. No, like if you remember that, more power to you. That's great. Call me, we'll talk about it. But honestly, what I want you the most to get away from this is that there's more that meets the eye to lakes. When you think about lakes, just like we said at the beginning, I know that you're thinking about fish. I know sometimes you think about plants and things like that, but there are so many tiny things in a lake that help those larger organisms to survive, that it's just a whole nother world. And so I really liked these two quotes here. Someone said, if you're shopping for a home entertainment system, you can't do better than a good dissecting scope. You know, the simplest pocket microscope will reveal wonders 1,000 times more thrilling than anything Alice saw in the looking glass. So again, a lot of really interesting creatures out there. There's so many more to talk about. If you're interested in those videos I had that didn't work, I'm so sorry that I wasn't able to show you those, but just shoot me an email, water@discoverycenter.net. Super easy email there. I'll send you the links to those videos so that you can see them. And then if you're interested in any other hidden lake creatures, we can talk about it. We can go from there. So thank you so much. I don't know if there are any questions since we went so quickly, but if there are any, I'd be happy to take them.
So just looking in the Q&A section right now, there is no questions, but we have a couple fans of the water bear, and there's a couple people that would like one of those.
Yeah. We have a local pier and dock company, and they put out an ad one year that said they had a picture of like this big blown up water bear on their docks, and it said that their docks were tougher than a tardigrade. That was their little slogan.
Did it work or did it not work?
I mean, I don't live on lakefront property, but I was like, if I did, I would buy one of those docks just because of the water bear.
So it definitely worked with you. Awesome.
Sure did.
We have like 5 more minutes. If you want to tell us one of your favorite stories that you maybe when you found something that you weren't expecting and that was hidden in a lake. Do you have any good stories?
Heck yeah, I do. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about zooplankton because I love these guys. So this one right here, one of the coolest zooplankton I think is called Halopedium. And I kind of just really briefly mentioned that they can form these jelly coats over them. And they do that, you know, for protection. You know, obviously you're not going to want to eat that big jelly ball. You want what's inside of it, right? And so they can really increase their population numbers in lakes sometimes. And so if you're sampling for zooplankton, or even one year, these all washed up on the shore of, I think it was Lake Michigan. This is like legitimately what it looks like to have all of those in your hand. I think it feels really cool. It's kind of freaky. But yeah, they look like little elephants under a microscope. And then another really neat zooplankton that I like, well, Bosmina is my favorite just because look how cute. But Leptadora here, this is one of the predatory zooplankton I mentioned. In this picture, you can see it a little bit more clearly, but when they are underwater and floating around, these are pretty much invisible. And that's really awesome because these guys sneak up on other zooplankton. So my cute little Bosmina baby over here, these guys will sneak up and grab them with these big, they're basically arms. They use them to kick around to eat too. But they grab them and then they'll bring them up to their mouth hole here. And they basically just like suck out all of their soft juices. And then what is left is the exoskeleton of the zooplankton. And then they just discard that. And then they go on to the next one.
We did have one question come through. So bryozoans and water sponges are 2 different things.
They are, yeah. Sponges look a little bit more like this. Okay. See that, like the mossy feature? And when you hold them, they almost feel like coarse. In all of the ones that I've seen in my region, I'm in Vilas, Oneida County, they're green and they have this really musty odor to them. So they, when I say they feel coarse, I mean, they feel like exactly what you would imagine like a kitchen sponge feeling like. The bryozoan, this is much more brainy. And usually when you see these, it's more of a brown color. And it's literally like when you hold it, it feels like you're holding a little brain. So it's squishy. It has a little bit of give to it. Don't dig your fingers into it. They worked hard making that structure, but you can hold it and it feels really blobby. So they are two different structures. They each have their own specific species.
We had another one come in. Can you suggest a good pocket microscope?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. I can't suggest a specific brand just because I'm a big nerd and I like my nice dissecting microscope, but I've heard of people who, if you just go to Amazon and you search like simple dissecting microscope, there's a ton of examples that come up. I just looked at this the other day and they all have really good reviews. And so, I didn't see anything it looks super junky or anything like that, but I think that there are definitely a lot of good cost-effective options out there on Amazon. And if you get one and you really like it, let me know.
Perfect. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions and we're kind of on the time crunch. So if you want to unshare your screen, and we'll have Nancy share her screen in the process of it.